Skeptics in the Pub is a nationwide organisation that that puts on a series of talks around science, religion, philosophy, things like challenging climate change denial, AIDS denialism, which is apparently a thing, and various other kind of just basically tackling pseudoscience and kind of misbeliefs. Once a year, we have our perfectly timed Christmas religious talk. Last year it was on whether Jesus existed or not. TLDR didn't exist. And this year it's on about the difficulties of leaving Muslim faith, but obviously they can talk more about that than I can.
So thank you for coming out today, and thank you of course to Newcastle Skeptics for inviting me up here. And I've never been to Newcastle, so I was actually quite excited to come along and see it. So as I was introduced, my name is Alia and I'm an ex-Muslim atheist. I think it's quite a new word. I mean, I'm not sure, have a lot of you ever heard of the word ex-Muslim before? Or, no? Yeah. Well, you're not the only ones. Actually, even within the Muslim community, the word ex-Muslim seems quite alien, which is quite interesting. And one of the most interesting things about, labels is often, when there's a new label on the scene, people will say, oh, it's very controversial, or, why do you need to label yourself that way? But people that have left Islam have felt the need to actually take on a separate label. And the reason why they've done that is because there is a serious taboo about leaving Islam, the same way that some of you may be aware of how within your own communities and culture being gay is taboo. If you only go back 20, 30, 40 years ago, you wouldn't have told your parents that you were gay because you were afraid of what their reactions may have been. So ex-Muslims or people that have left Islam, because not everybody who leaves the religion actually uses the label, deal with a very similar taboo within their families. So me and my colleague Imtiaz, you can see with the camera, we run an organisation in London called Faith to Faithless, and we've been running it for about a year now. And essentially it's not just for ex-Muslims, it's for anybody across the board who is an apostate. Now, apostasy is quite a funny word because it's a bit old-fashioned. Not a lot of people use the word apostate. But we've kind of had to sort of adopt the word because of the need for us to feel comfortable in the fact that we've left Islam. So we set this organisation up, and essentially what we do is we raise awareness for ex-Muslims, for people who are ex-Jews or ex-Hindus or ex-Sikhs, and we also try to offer them pastoral care and to make them feel comfortable in who they are. So one of the most important things to remember is that ex-Muslims within Britain and outside of Britain deal with sometimes similar and often very different issues. So if you're a British ex-Muslim and you've kind of found that you don't believe in Islam anymore, a lot of the times we get told by people who are atheists, why don't you just tell your parents? Is it such a big deal? Or if your parents don't love you because you left Islam, then they're not worth it anyway. And that's a bit uncomfortable for us because we love our parents, and it's not so simple, just to get up and walk out the door. But I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of an understanding of why apostasy is such a serious issue for us. As some of you who know about the Christian Inquisition that happened a long, long time ago, different religions have oppressed people who have left Christianity. But unfortunately for ex-Muslims and people of Muslim heritage, that's still an issue today. So I'll give you a little bit of a theological understanding of why, but I won't focus so much on it because, in a way, it is important, the theology, but at the same time, what's more important is the practical and how it actually affects people in the real world. Because I don't know if you've ever seen it. Have you ever been sort of watching the BBC and somebody will be brought on, a Muslim commentator, and they'll say, "Oh, what do you think of apostasy? Should apostates be killed to death? And should they sort of be killed?" And they'll be sort of grilled over it on the television. And I think what often happens is it's very hard to kind of understand that this is quite a big debate. So I don't know if you know Tariq Ramadan. He's quite a famous Muslim, and he is a scholar of Islam. He works at Oxford University, and what he said about apostasy and leaving Islam is that there are many scholars today and in the past that do believe that apostasy is punishable by death. But at the same time, there have been scholars from the 8th century that have said that no, that's not right. So what we can see is that there is a sort of academic argument about what's going on, but what we do know is that there are countries around the world now that do persecute ex-Muslims. They do find themselves in a position where they can be murdered by the state, they can be taken to prison or deal with fines. And often those people have to seek asylum, flee for their lives, or do what we British ex-Muslims do, which is stay in the closet. They have to keep it a secret, and one of the things that you'll find is that ex-Muslims often use the same language as gay civil rights activists. And the reason why we do that is because it makes sense. Because most ex-Muslims, when they realise that they don't believe anymore, most people's initial instinct is to keep it a secret from their friends, from their family. I was a little bit backwards actually, because when I left Islam, I told my sister immediately, like the next day. I'll give you a little bit of an understanding of my kind of context and how I got to this position. I was educated at Islamic schools from the age of about 11. So I went to a British Islamic school for 5 years, and I went to an Islamic boarding school in Pakistan for a year as well. And I was educated in possibly the strictest and most fundamentalist form of Islam possible. To the point where when I was 16, I wore the face veil and gloves, and I was very, very quiet and wouldn't sort of speak loudly in public because I wanted to be a good girl. And what happened to me was, when I came back to Britain from Pakistan at the age of 17, I was really quite religious. So I was religious enough to be teaching the interpretation of the Quran in my local college in the prayer room. And I had started studying sociology. And one of the topics that we covered was the role of religion in society. And being 19 years old, I found myself in classes and we were discussing feminism. And this was the first time that I had really come across feminism, because the Islamic boarding school that I grew up in, that I was educated in Britain, was private, and therefore they massively limited our curriculum to the extent where I didn't study history, geography, music, drama, art, food technology, whatever, textiles, just the things that everybody else takes for granted. We didn't have access to it. So I've had this severe kind of religious schooling from the age of 11 to 18 years old. When I find myself in college, sitting around and studying feminism and Marxism, my mind was was blown because it was interesting. I had always felt suffocated by the headscarf. I had always had difficulties as a young girl dealing with religion and the cultural codes that come with it. But now I was being given a language to understand what was going on to me and for me to put it into context. So, I've started to question religion, and I didn't tell anyone, obviously. I was a bit scared about that. And then I was in the library, and I was walking, and I was going past books, and literally a book just screamed out at me, and I just sort of looked back. And it was A God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. I'm sure most of you have know of it. And I started to read it. I used to take it on the train with me, and I used to be wearing like a long abaya to my feet and a headscarf, reading The God Delusion, and women would be looking at me like, something's not right there. So I started reading The God Delusion, and the thing about it is that because my understanding of science was so weak, especially because I had never studied evolution, and remember I'm 19 years old at this point, I'm not a child. I'd never studied evolution, apart from the one time in Pakistan where I read a book by a guy called Harun Yahya, who yeah, he's just a crazy, weird guy who now runs a cult in Turkey. So I'm reading his book. And essentially he argues that Darwinism and evolution caused fascism. That's the reason why Nazi Germany happened. That's the reason why Stalin was the way that he was. You know, it was Darwin's fault that Mao did what he did. And I was like, yeah, Darwin really sucks, right? You know? and I thought evolution was a fringe theory. You know, it was like a little thing. A few people believed in it. So when I started reading Richard Dawkins, and I didn't really understand his book, and went to research into evolution, and I've seen hundreds of books and articles come up, I was like, there's 100% something going on. So I've gone through a whole process, and I left the religion, and I told my sister, and I'm really excited, and I've gone, do you know what? I'm an atheist, and she was horrified. She looked at me like with absolute horror because, you know, she said this to me many years later. She said, you were the first person that I had ever met in my life who said that they didn't believe in Islam. And that is the way that it is for a lot of people. Often I'm the first ex-Muslim they'll ever meet because I'm public about it. Even though they may have a family member who is an ex-Muslim, they may have it within, you know, their partner might be an ex-Muslim, but they don't even know it. So, you know, I had my own issues with my family, and me and them managed to maintain a very, very healthy, well, a very good relationship. But you know, it's not the same necessarily with other people that, you know, leave religion. The part of the reason why I kind of got involved in what I do, which is try to raise awareness for people like me, is because often ex-Muslims don't need that much from me. All they need is the understanding that they're not the only ones, and that there's nothing wrong with them. And I mean, this is something that I also deal with when I speak to, you know, there are ex-Christians now who are still dealing with the same issues that ex-Muslims deal with if they come from a Jehovah's Witness background, or if they come from a Mormon background, or, you know, Pentecostal, where your life is so governed by religion. If you're from Church of England, maybe it might be difficult, but even then I don't know. But for the last year I've been sort of working with young ex-Muslims from around London, from around the UK. I get contacted by ex-Muslims from Saudi Arabia. And the funny thing about the ones from abroad, like the ones from Saudi Arabia or Iran or Iraq, is that they have they're different to ex-Muslims in the UK in some ways, because for them it's almost like, you know, it's their state doing it against them. So for instance, I don't know if you know, there's a lot of countries around the world that have laws where if you leave Islam, you can be put to death, or you can be fined, or you can be put into prison. And sometimes it's not just leaving Islam. Sometimes it's converting somebody out of Islam. You can get in trouble for that. You can get in trouble for it if you are a Muslim, but you don't believe in the Islam that your state approves of. So for instance, very recently, 27 people in Sudan are on trial for apostasy, but they're all Muslims. Not a single one of them is an apostate. They don't believe what I believe in, but the reason why they're being persecuted and put on trial is because they don't believe in the sayings of Muhammad. So you have the Quran, which is a holy text, and then you have the Sunnah. And the Sunnah essentially is the life, the actions, the saying, and the thought of Muhammad. And, you know, Muslims differ over which book is authentic, which book is right, you know, what he meant by it, but that's the general gist of it. These 27 people believe that actually the sources that we have for Muhammad's life, they don't believe it to be authentic or or that it represents for them what it means for other Muslims. And for that reason, they've been put on to trial for apostasy. And I want to speak to you about somebody who I find very interesting. Is a man called Dara. Have you ever heard of the Mughal Prince Dara? No? Okay. You might know his father better. He made the Taj Mahal. Yeah. Okay. So he made the Taj Mahal. So he had two sons. And the reason why I know about Dara is because I went to watch a play in London last year, and I learned quite a lot from this play. But Dara was a Sufi mystic Muslim, and Sufis are very different to Sunnis and Shias. They're much more kind of mystical. They believe that through their actions, through revelation, rather than logic and ethics, you can have a connection with God. You can be at one with God. And it's a lot of Muslims don't necessarily consider them to be Muslims, right? And you understand that that's a bit of a theme. A lot of Muslims saying to other people that you're not a Muslim, and that's where apostasy is thrown around like a tool, like it's used against people in a political space. So for us, British ex-Muslims who actually leave Islam, there's a religious connotations of the fact that you've left the religion. But in many countries, apostasy laws are used to stifle political challenge to the government. And that's why obviously geopolitics are very important. But the thing about Dara was, in the Quran there's a verse which talks about two rivers mingling. And Harun Yahya, that great cult leader, believed that obviously it's like a miracle, it's a scientific miracle, which it's not. But Dara believes that verse meant that there was going to be like a connection between Hinduism and Islam. Some people say that he meant that Sikhism is going to be that merging of Islam and Hinduism together. Essentially, he believed that a verse in the Quran was a prophecy about the changes that will come into the Mughal Empire, and that was seen to be apostasy. Now, his brother, who was younger than him and wanted political power, accused his brother of being an apostate, even though he was a very, very devout Muslim. And he was put to death, and they chopped his head off and gave it to his father, as you do. And he in the play there's this amazing scene where Dara is in a Sharia court, so he's in an Islamic law court, and he's handling the case himself. And essentially he's saying, that he's not an apostate, that he is a Muslim, that he believes that, God is much more spiritual than what his brother believed it to be. At one point there was a woman sitting behind a veil, and he turned to her and said, "It causes me pain that you're behind that veil." And this is from the 16th century. So we have to also understand that this kind of fight, within Islam, between Muslims, about Muslims, with apostasy, is very old, and it's still raging. Often people will say, "Oh, well, it's all Saudi Arabia, it's all Wahhabism." There's a lot of truth in that. The Wahhabi ideology that's being spread around by Saudi money is contributing, in my opinion, to a lot of the spread of extremism. But it didn't start then. It started well before that. And that's what I think is quite important to remember about apostasy, is that it's not an atheism versus Islam thing. It's much more about the right to challenge and the right to free speech and to thought. And as we're all aware, there's been murders of cartoonists, etc. And a lot of ex-Muslims are very supportive of Charlie Hebdo. Not all of them, of course, because we have our differences. We're not a monolithic group either. But because free speech is very important for us. But in terms of theology, the reason why some people argue that an apostate can be put to death is because there's a saying of Muhammad, supposedly, that he said, "He who leaves his religion, kill him." And also, there's verses in the Quran about, he who believes and then disbelieves and then believes and then disbelieves and then increases in disbelief, then, God will never forgive him. But at the same time, there are other verses. I mean, there's a small little chapter which says, tell the disbelievers that for you is your religion, for me is my religion, for you, you worship what you worship, I worship what I worship, and so forth. But this is the thing about it, if you're a Muslim, that's good enough for you, I suppose, that kind of verse. But if you're a skeptic, you'll say, well, actually, there's contradictions now. On one side it says that there's room for you, on the other side that they say that there's not. But I think theology is important, it's academic, but what's much more important is the way that it affects people in their day-to-day life. You know, ex-Muslims that I meet that are 16 years old, 17 years old at college, they don't care if Tariq Ramadan in Oxford says that you're not going to be put to death, because it doesn't reach their lives. It's good that he does that because he's part of that theological conversation, but it's much more about how is our government, how is our state, and how are our institutions dealing with this? So, for instance, ex-Muslims deal with severe ostracism. I've spoken to ex-Muslims who, some have been completely excommunicated from their families. Adults, people that come from liberal families, but their families can't cope with the prejudice, they don't understand it. So, kids will be kind of removed from that family space. And one of the things that I kind of see across the board is in Britain, the institutions that we have at the moment don't understand that apostasy is quite a specific thing. So, for instance, if an ex-Muslim is assaulted by a family member or by someone in the street, no, we'll stick with family member. If an apostate is hit by a family member, at the moment it's classified as honour-based violence. But that kind of actually anti-apostate violence isn't registered because the state at the moment doesn't really accept it as a real thing. And this is something that we have to deal with across the board, not being seen to exist. So, I mean, for instance, there's a journalist called Nisreen Malik, and I was reading an article that she wrote last year about the fact that Saudi Arabia have classified atheism as terrorism. It's true. So if you're an atheist and you get caught, that's essentially what you are. And she said something really interesting. Let me find it for you, because I think in a way she kind of summarizes the reaction that ex-Muslims get across the board. Here we go. So the title is hilarious because essentially it's saying that there's more than one way to be an atheist in Islam. As though, why would we leave Islam if we wanted to do it within the sphere? But that's fine. Essentially, she says, I would make the distinction between individual atheism as a matter of belief and the position of publicly declaring oneself atheist, or more potently, ex-Muslim. The former is a personal position, the latter a political one that seeks to challenge authority. What's wrong with challenging authority? What I don't understand. That's what's really interesting about it, because the word ex-Muslim is seen to be a controversial one, which is seeking an argument. But a lot of the ex-Muslims that I deal with aren't interested in politics. They're not necessarily involved in this secular space because they're just normal people trying to live their life, trying to live a personal choice. But the reason why they take the label of ex-Muslim is because it makes sense. Because ex-Muslims, or anybody who is of Muslim heritage and doesn't believe in Islam anymore, doesn't exist in our collective consciousness as anything other than bad and exiles, the word is used as a way to say, this is who I am. I'm not anti-Muslim. I don't hate my Muslim parents. I'm not obsessed with Islam. I'm just not a Muslim. I'm just an ex-Muslim. And being able to say that, it's a bit similar to, how people will say, oh, well, if you are a lesbian, why do you have to use the word lesbian? Why can't you just say that you love people? And that's what, one of my favorite poets, Stacey Ann Chin, said. People would say that to her. Why do you have to, I find that word really, confrontational. And it's the same thing with us, It's very confrontational. You're saying that you used to be a Muslim and you're not. I don't care. Well, if you don't care, well then remind that to every other person who tells you what they are. But all of a sudden we can't say what we are. And it's because it's so taboo. It's because it's so taboo. And there's a very specific gendered experience for ex-Muslim women. So when I was dealing with telling my family that I don't believe in Islam anymore, it wasn't just a theological conversation, because in my family, I studied religion the most actually, because I went to all the religious schools. So we never really had a long theological conversation. But the main issue was my behavior. Right, so if you're an ex-Muslim, what does that mean? Does that mean that you're going to take your headscarf off? I did. Does that mean that you're going to have a boyfriend? Does that mean you're going to drink? Does that mean you're going to go out? So often it's not just about the fact that you don't believe in Muhammad or you don't believe in the Quran, but because I go back to my sociology Marxist classes, because religion has been used as a way to control society and especially to control the bodies of women, to say that I don't believe in Islam anymore, the first reaction is for women is, oh my God, are you going to sort of get drunk and just, go out in the street naked or something? Like, it's just this instantaneous reaction of what does that mean? And I think that's what we need to sort of move away from the extremity, like those ideas. I mean, with my parents, they were really worried that I was going to become a sort of hooligan. And I went away and went to college and did really well, and I was very successful. And I think them seeing that even though I was an atheist, I wasn't this, crazy person, has allowed them to understand something about atheism and humanism, which they may never have known. And that's why visibility is very important. And, I've always said that I really hope that one day, the word ex-Muslim doesn't really exist, if that makes sense. Like, I want it, if I could tell you my kind of goal, my dream of what would happen in the future, it would be this. If a young Muslim, and not just one, living somewhere in London, like most Muslim kids, could go to their parents and say, I don't believe in Islam anymore, and their parents just do it. Just don't really care. Whatever. Like, that's all I want. Just that kind of nonchalance, we don't care attitude to come from it. Just that tolerance and that space and that place for acceptance. That's essentially all we want. I mean, I did a video recently where I spoke about taking hijab off and how to do it, and how to deal with the shame and the guilt that comes with it. And someone said to me, "Oh, you're corrupter of the youth. You're facilitating women from taking their hijab off." And I was like, "Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, I'm not going to apologize for it because I've been there before." And I think it means a lot for people to see that other people like them exist. So I'll give you an example of something. I went to the first time I ever spoke in public, last year, November, and the first time that I ever told the world publicly that I was an atheist was in front of 250 people at a secular conference. And I was really, really, really worried about it. Most speakers in the conference that were secularists, atheists, humanists, were women of colour. We had women in saris from Sri Lanka. We had Bengali women, Pakistani women, Iraqi, Iranian, and so forth, just across the board. And it was this, I'm surrounded by these women. I've always grown up thinking, where do I belong? And it was there. That's what I understood. But when it was printed in The Guardian, guess whose face they put on the article cover? Richard Dawkins. and he didn't even talk. He was there for 10 minutes or 15, 20 minutes. Like, just, he made an appearance and an entrance, and they put his face on it. And it's really important to remember that atheism is not just about white men. There's a lot of white men in this room. It's not just about white men, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But it has to become accessible to people. So that if you are a young girl from a Sikh background, if you don't believe in God, that shouldn't have to be a big deal. People shouldn't have to come up to you and say, okay, well, can you explain to me theologically why you don't believe in God, and can you explain why you did that? That doesn't need to necessarily happen to people. Because when I first left, and if I told people, I'd have to go into a long, long kind of explanation, an apology, and I'm really sorry, I don't mean to offend you. And it's like, we have to kind of get past that point now. We have to get to a point now where, especially in Britain, I mean, if you live in somewhere like Saudi Arabia or Iran or Pakistan, you're in for a long fight, and people like me and secularists in Britain around the world support you, I hope. But if you're a British ex-Muslim or an apostate of any other kind of background, I think, the most important thing for people to understand is that they're really, really not alone. I mean, in London, for instance, I know at least 200 ex-Muslims, and that's only the people that I know, not including the ones who are kind of hide in or don't know how to identify, don't know what space they belong to. I mean, I'll give you a really funny story actually. So me and Imtiaz do events across universities where we have coming out events. Essentially the first time that people had ever spoken in public and told people that they don't believe in Islam. And a lot of the time this is how their families found out, because a YouTube video had circulated. And so we got contacted by a girl who said, I watched your video and it was really amazing, and I've decided that, I had had enough, and I told my parents, and now I don't know what to do. And we had to go pick her up from the park and give her chocolates because she was crying. Because what she had done was watch the video, and then on Eid, which is our religious festival, come out at that point. So like coming out at Christmas dinner. She came out at Christmas dinner. And I was like, well, we didn't tell you to do that. But okay, fair enough. And she's absolutely fine now. And she's kind of got past that kind of barrier. And this is one of the interesting things about it, is that people are so scared of the taboo, and then they meet someone like themselves, and then they're just like, whoa, yeah, there's nothing wrong with me. And essentially that's a lot of what we're trying to do, which is just to get people to understand that you're not like a menace to society. I mean, I know it sounds really ridiculous, but you can feel like a bit of a menace to society. I mean, the word apostate is treated like a dirty word. I mean, John Kerry, USA? He's a politician, and he said that ISIS are apostates. He said they're apostates, and it's like, okay, but the reason why that's annoying is not just because they're not apostates, because first of all, when did John Kerry become a sheikh that he was going to give fatwas on these things? But what's more important is this: the word apostate is being used as a bad word, as a dirty word, that, Muslims are good and apostates are bad. ISIS can't be Muslim because they're not good, so therefore they must be apostates. But where does that leave us, the ones who are already dehumanized, the ones who already don't exist? We are then kind of pushed more into this idea of the fact that we're bad people. And I mean, there's a lot of words that get used for us, especially the ones who speak in public. We get called Uncle Tom, native informant. It's one of my favorites, native informant. And the reason why it's so good, because the first time I ever heard of it, it was actually from a woman who had converted into Islam, but it's actually French. And she called ex-Muslims native informants. And the reason why it's essentially saying that you're from inside and you're essentially snitching or telling on your community. And that's a bit difficult for us, because essentially it assumes that all of us Muslims are the same, and that anyone who talks about it outside is essentially betraying or being a traitor, and we already feel that way. I mean, ex-Muslims get told that they're betraying their families, or that we're going to cause them distress or pain, and it's hard sometimes speaking to young kids who are at college and school, and they feel like they don't belong anywhere. I mean, when I left Islam and I was going through all my, it's quite funny because when I was a kid, I used to question Islam a lot. When I was in this Islamic boarding school, I got thrown out of class because I was questioning the death sentence for homosexuality, and I was essentially saying, well, if God made them this way, then why are they going to be killed this way? I think it's a pretty legit question. But essentially what she said to me, which my teacher was, oh, that's really bad, and she said to me, get up and say the declaration of faith. Say that there is no God and Muhammad is his messenger. And I said no. And I was only 13 and they kicked me out and I got thrown out. But so when I was a kid, I got taken to this one imam. And at that point he said to me, just, behave yourself, listen to your mom. very small. And I got a little bit older, and I was still questioning, and then he said to me, I told you before, stop reading all these books. And the last time that you saw me, I had taken my hijab off. I had already come out publicly as an atheist, and it's been 7 years. And he sort of looked at me, and we gave each other a bit of a, all right then, we know what's happening here. And he let it be. And he knows I'm an ex-Muslim. He's known it for a very long time, and he's not done anything about it. And that's the interesting thing about Muslim communities is you look at them and you'll think they're like largely intolerant people, but it's much more complicated than that. Most Muslims in the UK are immigrants or children of immigrants, and therefore they're very kind of close-knit community. Especially some of you might know in places like Birmingham or like Wassall or Keighley, kind of small communities are affected by poverty and different factors that make them to be kind of small, close-knit communities. And at that point, it's very difficult for people to basically break away and find other ex-Muslims like themselves because the communities are so closed off. But that's why, in a way, social media makes such a big difference. I mean, I don't know if you guys are. Does anyone use a lot of Twitter here or? Yeah. Okay. Well, I live on Twitter, and there was a hashtag. So essentially, the way Twitter works is you'll have a hashtag, which is like a phrase, and it can be used by multiple people for the same reason. So there was one which was started by an ex-Muslim organisation, Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. Essentially, it was hashtag ex-Muslim because. Within the first 24 hours, it just spread like wildfire. Within, I think, 10 days, 100,000 people had used it. And for us, that was really exciting because we don't have research, we don't have statistics, we don't know how many people like us there are in this country, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, even in places like Morocco. You know, people go on holiday to Morocco and they sit at the beach and it's really nice, but even Morocco has blasphemy and apostasy codes. So we don't know how many people there are. I mean, you know that, for instance, the only kind of research that I know that there are about apostasy, if anybody is a student of sociology and you want to study more, Simon Coty did a book called The Apostates, but he only interviewed 30 people. And it took him over a year just to get access to ex-Muslims because ex-Muslims are that isolated and they're that wary of interacting with people because they're so worried about their identity being compromised. So I think one of the things that I think is really important is awareness, listening, seeing what you can do to help, but also, you know, for institutions like schools, universities, medical health professional to actually realize that there is a very specific issue and that it needs to be dealt with in a certain way. So for instance, one of my young ex-Muslims that I know, he went to a therapist and said that, oh, I'm an ex-Muslim and my family are really upset with me and I don't know what to do and blah, blah, blah. And the therapist listened to him and said, oh, do you know what? I know what you can do. And he tried to put him in contact with a Muslim organization. And that's because they don't understand it. So we're dealing with something that is old. I spoke about Dara before. Apostasy is an old thing. Dara wasn't an apostate, but this idea of policing thought around religion has been there for a very long time. But what we're doing is actually it's new, but it's not so new because people have been kind of fighting for this for a very long time around the world in different places. But I think we've got to a point, I know I have, where I've got to a point where I've said, you know, it's not good enough now. Like, we have to move forward. I don't know if you know Mohammed Shafiq. No, I don't know Mohammed Shafiq. He's the guy, he runs the Ramadan Foundation, and he was asked about ex-Muslims, and he said, look, you're more than welcome to believe whatever you want to believe in, but you have to understand that there are consequences to your actions. And that's where I say no. That's not good enough. There shouldn't be consequences. You shouldn't have to feel like you're going to lose your family or your parents, or you're going to be kicked out of home, or you're going to find yourself homeless and in poverty or failing college or any of the other crap that happens in worst case scenarios. You don't have to feel like that just because you've made a personal choice about whether or not you believe a book in a language that you probably don't understand is from God or not. And I think that's why we need to move forward, because it's getting to a point now where I think a lot of ex-Muslims are getting quite sick and tired of it, and there's networks in the UK that are sort of underground. They're not public because we're worried about safety, and also ex-Muslims are very worried about their families finding out. So, some of the younger ones that have kind of grown up with social media and they've been able to sort of hear about other people when they were young, I think they feel a bit, they have kind of what I didn't have when I was 19, because it took me 5 years to find anyone like myself. And that's part of the reason why I do what I do, because essentially what I'm doing is I'm saying very loudly, I'm here, I'm ex-Muslim, I don't think you're crazy, even if I'm not perfect, even if you don't listen to half of what I say, even if you think all of my opinions on religion are nonsense, that's fine with me, I don't really mind. It's just that kind of raising that awareness so that people understand that they're not abnormal. And I've had one of the things that people say is, Nasreen says it as well, which is that, people have been irreligious in Muslim communities for a very, very long time. Why do you have to now use the word ex-Muslim? Why does it have to, why do you have to blow this horn so loudly? And part of the reason why we're doing it is because it's 2015. We've got the whole world, the world is changing to a point where there was a report recently that found that 50% of British people are non-religious. And that's not even something to take into consideration that there's probably more people within Muslim and PME communities that are also probably non-religious as well. And like, for instance, even in Saudi Arabia, there's evidence to prove that at least 5% of Saudi Arabians, at least 15% of Saudi Arabians are atheists. And I think that's only the start of it. So part of what I do and some of the other ex-Muslims that I work with in the UK do is that we try to talk about these issues because they matter, and because ex-Muslims abroad often don't have any space to do that. So I've spoken for 40 minutes now, and I will leave it open to you to ask any questions or to give me your comments and your feedback. But that's fine.